Okay, it's time again for the Press Box Podcast. This is our college football recap of Week 10. Lots of great games in Week 10. The second college football playoff poll has come out. Lots of good discussion around that as some teams have moved around in some positions that, well, we may not really have thought that was where they should be. So we'll have lots of discussion at that. We'll preview the Week 11 games as we usually do, look at some scheduling and look at some potential outcomes as we push towards the end of the season. So a lot for you today on the college football recap for week number 10. Make sure you hit us up on Twitter at PressBoxPod, on Instagram at PressBoxPod, and of course the YouTube channel, the PressBox Podcast. So without further ado, the PressBox Podcast. Okay, welcome back to the Press Box Podcast. This is episode number 106. It's our weekly college football recap. College football just completed their Week 10 games. We had a few big games over the weekend, but nothing as dramatic as Michigan State from the previous week. So today I'm joined by my producer, Nathan Miranda, as I usually am. I'm your host or co-host, Ralph Miranda. We're also joined by our other co-host, Joseph Miranda, today. And before we get started, like we do every week, we're going to go over the weekly top 25. As you all know, we've been going over the AP top 25, but since the college football rankings came out for the first time last week, we are now using those, since obviously those are the only ones that matter when it comes to deciding which four teams will make the playoff. Not a whole lot of changes from last week. Georgia is still a solid number one. In fact, they're still a unanimous number one in the AP top 25. Alabama is still number two. Oregon has moved up to number three. Michigan State's loss allowed that to happen. Ohio State has moved up to number four. So right now, if the playoffs started this weekend, it would be Georgia against Ohio State and Alabama against Oregon. Cincinnati moved up to number five. Michigan moved up to number six. Michigan State dropped to seven. Oklahoma at 9-0 is sitting at number 8. Notre Dame is number 9, and Oklahoma State is number 10. Of course, it's filled out after that by Texas A&M, Wake Forest, Baylor, Brigham Young, Ole Miss, North Carolina State, Auburn, Wisconsin, Purdue, Iowa, Pittsburgh, San Diego State, University of Texas, San Antonio, Utah, and Arkansas. So I'm going to start by one bit of kind of a confusing result is the committee has said many times that they value head-to-head, and they dropped Michigan State one behind Michigan when Michigan State, in fact, beat Michigan. So I guess I'll throw that out first. Joseph, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't. Have they come out and said they value head-to-head, or that's just kind of implied?
No, they've said that. You know, every time they do the show where they reveal the new rankings, they always have a little back and forth with the committee chairman. And they've said a number of times in the past that they do value head-to-head.
They value it or not, which apparently they do. I think, yeah, if Michigan State beat Michigan, which they did,
right,
they should clearly be ranked ahead of them, because if you're deciding on which team is better, well, it was proven on the field, right? So
yeah.
That makes the most sense to me in all factors, not just the playoff committee. So whether Michigan's actually better than Michigan State, we don't know. All you can go off of is when they play.
Correct. And I also think part of the reason they did that is because they have a lot of room to correct it, meaning that Michigan State still has to play Ohio State. Michigan has to play Ohio State. So if Michigan State ends up beating Ohio State and Michigan loses to Ohio State, obviously Michigan State will benefit from that. So I don't think it matters a whole lot at the moment.
That's
Nathan,
another thing that go ahead.
No, go ahead, Joseph. Go ahead.
Another thing I think is happening is, like you said, the committee knows the upcoming schedule. So I think it's a little bit factored in week to week is, okay, let's rank them like this, and then it'll get sorted out, next week or the week after, as opposed to just, okay, let's rank the best teams how we feel right this second,
Right. Yeah. And I think the interesting thing about this, of course, Michigan defeated Indiana 29-7 last Saturday. Indiana's not ranked, but they're considered one of the better teams in the Big Ten. Michigan State lost on the road to Purdue, and Purdue is unranked as well. Purdue also beat Iowa back when Iowa was ranked number 2. So that could have had something to do with it, maybe. But I still think that, as you said, it'll work itself out down the road with all these teams kind of playing each other.
Playing head-to-head should trump all that stuff because usually you look at strength of schedule to determine, well, which one of these teams should win if they played each other.
Right.
Who's better? Well, if they played each other, they answer that for you.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if the team that lost that game is actually better. They just happen to lose the game. They lost. So that's that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what to – like, the Patriots are probably better than the Giants in 07, but the Giants beat them in the Super Bowl.
Right.
You're not going to give them the Super Bowl trophy because they lost. So
right.
When I look at the rankings, this is my same problem with the AP rankings. Same problem with that as I have with the college football playoff rankings. If you look at the top 25, it looks like a hodgepodge of methodologies that they use to rank this. There's different methods you can use, right? You can go, okay, you can say we're strictly looking at record, no matter, or just say Power 5. We're looking at Power 5 records. Mm-hmm. Okay, then we're looking at head-to-head matches. There's different ways, or you could have the method of we're not looking at record and we're not looking at head-to-head. We're going to say who do we think is just the best team, regardless. Right. Who do we think has the best chance of being competitive in the playoff? Right. There's different methods you can use. Right. But if you look at this, if you try to review this or go through and analyze this with each method, it doesn't seem to fall into either one of those categories. It's like it's like a hodgepodge of methods they use to put this together. Right. Some like Michigan's ahead of Michigan State. Well, they have the same record and Michigan State beat them, but they may say, well, we just feel like Michigan's a better football team. Okay, that's okay. If that's the case, then you can find other. If that's the case, then how come some of these other things are the way they are? Like, I'm trying to think of an example here. Like, okay, yeah. If that's the case, then are you telling me that you think Michigan is actually not as good as Cincinnati? Then because Cincinnati's ahead of Michigan. They're the better football. That tells you, okay, well, they're probably looking at record then because Cincinnati's undefeated, Michigan isn't. Right. But if you look at that, then why is Oklahoma number 8? They're undefeated. Right. So it's like you can't really. No. They're using a hodgepodge of methods. It's on a team-by-team basis, which you can't do.
I think that there needs to be a few like hardline factors. Like, okay, so because obviously the committee is a group of people in a room, right? Right. But if a team is beating another team, there's no discussion. They're ahead. If there's a question, right? Right. If a team has a better record than another team, no question, they're ahead. You just use the committee to discussion for teams that have the same record and haven't played each other, right?
Right. And I say when it comes to Power 5, because Cincinnati is different because they're undefeated, but they're not in Power 5. Mm-hmm. When it comes to Power 5 teams, I think rule number 1 should be record is over everything. Right. Because I know schedules are different, but if you're in the Power 5, you're all going to have pretty competitive schedules. Right. So if you're undefeated, that trumps everything. That should be number 1. And that would put Oklahoma much higher, but Oklahoma's 8th somehow. And what's more mind-boggling is they stayed the same. They didn't move at all in the rankings. They dropped Michigan State ahead of Oklahoma after they lost. Right. And they lost to who beat them?
Purdue beat Michigan
State. Who wasn't ranked ahead of Michigan State. No. Like, it's just very strange. And Oklahoma's a Power 5 team. So they really dislike Oklahoma, obviously.
Well, they do. Right. Oklahoma plays in a weaker conference, and they struggled with most of their opponents. But another thing, I mentioned earlier, I kind of misspoke saying Michigan lost to Indiana, which was considered a good team. Indiana's 2-7, and they haven't even won a game in the Big Ten. Purdue is 6-3 and is 4-2 in the Western Conference of the Western Division. So actually, Michigan State lost to a better football team than Michigan lost to or beat, and they fell behind Michigan. So,
and I'm assuming Notre Dame lost. I'm assuming it's Notre Dame has the same record as them, and they lost to a team that was ranked higher in Cincinnati.
Correct.
But I guess people consider them not to be as good of a team, though they are ranked higher.
I guess so.
Purdue and Indiana.
I guess so. But the interesting thing,
and I guess the rest of Notre Dame's schedule is not quite as good as the Big Ten schedule. I guess.
Well,
because otherwise, why are they?
You could say that, but I think Notre Dame's schedule is as good as Michigan and Michigan State's.
Yeah, so that's why I'm confused as to why they're below both those teams because they beat Purdue,
right?
They beat Wisconsin, who at the time was 18.
Right.
I don't know.
Wisconsin's 18 now.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what we're going to find out is it's going to be interesting because I looked at the Big Ten standings, and right now, if you look at, let me go back to it and look at the Big Ten. All right, in the Eastern Division of the Big Ten, Ohio State is 6-0 in conference. Michigan State's 5-1, Michigan's 5-1. Now, those three teams are all going to play each other, and they still got to play Penn State, a couple of them, who is 3-3 in the conference. Penn State's not a factor for winning the Eastern Division, but they could be a factor as to who does win the Eastern Division. So Ohio State could win it by beating Michigan State and Michigan, and then that makes it pretty cut and dry. But if one of them beats them, we could have an interesting factor. Now, let's look at the Western Division. Wisconsin, Minnesota, Purdue, and Iowa are all 4-2. So it's going to be interesting if a Purdue comes out of the West and beats one of these teams. Let's say Ohio State, they have to play Purdue, obviously, but let's say Purdue beats a Michigan or a Michigan State again. That's going to knock the Big Ten's strength of schedule or credibility down some. So I think the committee's sitting there like kind of with the catbird seat. They know they're taking flack. They know they're going to hear it, but they figure, hey, this is all going to work itself out. Okay. The only thing that's not going to work itself out for them is the Cincinnati factor. And that's something that I think they're hoping Cincinnati will lose to SMU, because really, if you look at Cincinnati's schedule, they've got 2 games left, SMU this Saturday and at Eastern Carolina. They're not going to lose to East Carolina, I wouldn't think. But obviously, I take that back. They play South Florida this week, and then they play SMU. So the Cincinnati factor could throw some wrench into the committee's thoughts, because right now you've got Cincinnati sitting at number 5. So let's say, for example, Georgia goes undefeated, Alabama goes undefeated the rest of the way, plays Georgia in the SEC championship, Oregon goes undefeated, wins the Pac-12 championship, Ohio State wins the Big Ten. Now you're going to have the Georgia-Alabama loser. If Georgia loses, are they going to drop them below Cincinnati? Probably not. If Alabama loses, they are. So I think there's a lot of things there that'll play itself out.
I don't like that. Joseph brought this up too. Like, I hope this is not what the committee's doing. Oh, well, it's all going to play itself out. We'll just do whatever. That's no excuse to not rank it the best you can at the moment.
I agree.
And their rankings make no sense. Let me bring this one ranking up too, right? Which I just saw. Explain this to me, please. Maybe there's something I'm missing, but University of Texas San Antonio,
right,
is 9-0 undefeated.
Right.
They are 23rd. They were not ranked before this week.
And right.
How come they are 23rd at 9-0 when Cincinnati is 9-0 at number 5? Now, what's Cincinnati's big game they beat?
Notre Dame.
Well, University of Tennessee San Antonio beat Illinois.
Right.
And who did Illinois just beat?
Yeah.
Penn State.
Yeah.
So Illinois is obviously pretty good.
Right.
So why are they 23rd? And shouldn't they be in the top 10 then? If you go put Cincinnati in the top 10, how are they different than Cincinnati?
I agree.
Well, based off what you just said there, I totally agree. Now the only thing is, didn't Cincinnati have a good year last year?
Yeah, but this.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah,
They did.
I was going to say maybe this committee's like, well, Cincinnati's historically better, but why does that matter?
Yeah.
Saying that like they came into the season ranked higher in the first polls, which explains, I guess, why. I
see what you're saying.
You know what I mean? Why they've stuck higher, but that explains the Cincinnati thing. Why I guess they're not ranked like in the 20s. But like you said, based off this year, yeah, Texas San Antonio. I think, of course, let me preface this. I haven't been on this podcast a lot. I don't watch a ton of the college football, but I think San Antonio and Cincinnati, those teams are kind of comparable. Maybe Cincinnati's a little better, but they're both not Power 5 teams, and they're both historically kind of obscure in college football.
Yeah, they're comparable, and maybe they're not like maybe Texas San Antonio shouldn't be like 6 right below Cincinnati, but they shouldn't be 23rd, I don't think.
Right.
But to Josh's point too, maybe let's say San Antonio finishes in the top 25 this season. Maybe next year, if they do the same thing, they will be in the top 10 or 5 because that would be the situation like Cincinnati.
Could be, yeah.
But
that's why I think that, and maybe you guys have talked about this before, maybe not, and they won't do this for height purposes. But you shouldn't even have polls or rankings until the first playoff polls.
Right.
Because Cincinnati got the advantage, obviously, from coming off a good year last year. Maybe they started ranked like 13th or 12th or whatever it was. Right. And then they're just going to keep being ahead of teams that are also undefeated that started behind them. You know?
Right.
I agree.
Right.
That's we brought that up before. I think.
Right.
That should be the case because you're right. They shouldn't preseason rank anybody. They shouldn't rank him at all until last week when they came out in the first conference.
Or at least 3 or 4 weeks into the season. I mean, something where you can start telling a little bit about these teams, because as you said, Joseph hit it on the head. You know, if a team comes in ranked 7th, all they got to do is keep winning, and they're going to move up the polls.
But then, like Joseph alluded to, like you've said before, then week 2 they can't say it's number 1 Alabama's playing number 5 Ohio State.
Right. That's right.
It's almost impossible to do this, but you really need to just erase all history. Like coming into the season, like forget about Alabama, like who they are historically. Like after the first 8 weeks, we think the best team or you know what I mean? It's like every year Alabama's gonna be in the top 5 based on look at the recruiting class, what they did last year, blah blah blah. Just because they're Alabama, you got to take that all the way and start from scratch. It's hard to do, but that's what they need to do sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think I agree with that too. And I think if Alabama's as good if they live up to that every year, then there shouldn't be a problem for them, right? But so I agree.
Well, I actually think that this week the AP Top 25, even though it doesn't really matter much, actually has it to me a little bit better. I mean, obviously Georgia's 1, Cincinnati's 2, undefeated. Alabama's 3, Oklahoma's 4 at 9-0, Oregon's 5, Ohio State's 6, Notre Dame is 7, Michigan State is 8, and Michigan's 9. But I mean, at least that's a little bit closer to what you would think.
I also think that the association knows that the poll ultimately doesn't matter, so they're kind of handing out field goal votes. Like, why is Cincinnati number 2? Are they really the second best team in the country? Whereas in the playoff ranking, they're farther behind because that's what matters. So I think the AP is like, let's make Cincinnati feel good. They can say they're ranked number 2, even though it doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? I think there's more of that going on than just Cincinnati too.
Right.
And they're playing off the fact that they know Cincinnati. They know people think Cincinnati should be ranked higher in the playoff. So they're going to say, we're ranking 2, and the people look at us and go, they got it right. Look at them.
Right.
But here's my problem with the AP. They're the same problem with the playoff. Their methodology doesn't satisfy any of the known methods to me.
Right.
Like Cincinnati's number 2, right? Undefeated. That tells me that, okay, they're looking at record. Right. Well, if that's the case, then how come an 8-1 Alabama's ahead of a 9-0 Oklahoma? They must not be looking at record. They must think Alabama's just better than Oklahoma.
I think they do.
Well, if that's the case, you tell me they think Cincinnati's better than Alabama? No. Pick one. And I think if the committee would come out too and publish and say this is how we do it. Mm-hmm. Number 1, we look at record. Number 2, we look at blah blah blah. Number 3, and then if we still need discussion, we discuss it on the roundtable. I think if they would have published that, they wouldn't get as much flack because people can argue things. They know whether. But right now, no one knows what goes on in that room between all these people. Half of which have nothing to do with college football. Don't know anything about college football.
I think that, and again, I'm considering myself pretty unbiased because I don't really have like a college team that I root for. What I was okay with the BCS. At least it was a computer that was pretty cut and dry. But this is the formula, right?
Right.
Like there's not a bunch of people in the room that can be like swayed. You know what I
mean? You tell me in 2021 they can't come out with an even better sophisticated computer to do that? You know they could.
Right.
First BCS was 1998. They're miles past that now.
Yeah, right. You could get. I mean, any one of these. I mean, you could get a very sophisticated computer system to rank it for you. It would be very accurate too. Yeah, I agree with that.
No, I agree, but it's a lot of it's politics, and from the standpoint of these networks like to have these shows and had talking heads like to talk about it. And you can't do that with a computer generated.
They want to equip people up into what we're discussing right now. So we're playing right into their hands.
Well, let's look at some of the games from last week. Go ahead. No, go ahead, Joseph. I'm sorry.
No. My last point was saying you can still have your BCS ranking show and do like get a show rating thing. You know.
Yeah. Did the computer get it right? They can debate. They can.
Go ahead.
Looking at some of last week's games that have generated some of this discussion that we're having today. It's interesting because the committee has said they look at strength of schedule, right? So SMU lost over the weekend. To let's see, who did they lose to? I just had it a minute ago. Well, I'll find it again. SMU actually lost over the weekend. So they now have 2 losses. That's going to hurt Cincinnati quite a bit. And Cincinnati has to hope that Notre Dame keeps winning, obviously, to help that victory.
SMU lost to Memphis.
Okay.
Hey, guess who beat Memphis?
Yeah.
San Antonio,
that's right. And then you had Alabama in a very, very unconvincing 20-14 win over LSU. Alabama rushed for less than 10 yards in that game. So what does that tell you? I mean, and yet Alabama stays at number 2. I mean, it's obvious what they're doing, right? They want to set up an Alabama-Georgia SEC championship game with 1 versus 2. That's what they would love to do. And of course, Alabama still has to get past Auburn, which gives them a lot of trouble. But that's to me is what they're looking for. You look at some of the other games. We talked about some of these. Michigan State losing to Purdue, who's actually a pretty good football team. And then Michigan losing to beating Indiana by 22 points, which Indiana's a 2-7 team. They should have blown them out. Oregon, I'm not even going to look at Oregon's schedule. I mean, they play the Pac-12 is horrible, and I mean, you can't really say it gives them any advantage.
We know they look at strength of schedule, but do they look at point differential? Do they look at how badly they beat teams?
Yeah, and supposedly, now don't quote me on this, but supposedly that was one of the reasons they didn't like the BCS, because the computer took into account point differential.
Program it not to.
I know that, but that's why they didn't. Part of the reason they didn't like it because it incentivized teams to run up the score on other teams.
Or ask it nicely not to.
Yes.
They can do it on its own.
No, they could, but I think that's why the committee doesn't look at they don't look at margin of victory.
Okay. All right.
No, I'm just answering your question.
No,
I think that's.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the reason.
Because they want to incentivize teams to run up the score base.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And
I think with Oregon, I don't think you put them in the playoff. I think what you guys said about the schedule and the feel of Oregon doesn't seem like a playoff team to me.
right.
I think you just pat them on the back, send them right to the Rose Bowl, and say, "Great season, boys. Great."
Yeah,
season.
good season.
Yeah,
Exactly.
They're very familiar with the Rose Bowl. They should love that.
Well,
Yeah.
let's look at the Pac-12 standings. I mean, you got Oregon in first place in the North at 5-1 in the conference, and then you got Washington State 5-4 overall, 4-2 second. After that, pretty much everybody's got a losing record.
What's UCLA this year?
UCLA is 5-4 overall, 3-3 in the conference. That Oregon's probably going to have to play Utah, it looks, for the conference championship, and that's probably going to be at least a challenge for them. I mean, considering that Utah is at least 6-3, but still, it's a worthless conference. I mean, and it really doesn't help Notre Dame.
Okay.
They got to play Stanford.
But I guess they must think it's better than the Big 12 because Oklahoma is undefeated. Oregon has one loss.
I guess
and Oklahoma is 5 points behind them.
Let's look at the
That
Big
doesn't
12.
make no sense to me.
Let's look at the Big 12 standings.
It's
There's
so
no
back to
divisions
the-
there. Oklahoma's 6-0. Oklahoma State 5-1. Baylor and Iowa State 4-2. There's better teams in the Big 12, actually.
And they're undefeated.
Yeah.
Well, Joseph?
It goes back to was Oregon higher preseason than Oklahoma? You know what I mean?
I don't remember, yeah.
Probably. In Oregon,
I don't know.
and has Oklahoma beat anybody as big as Oregon beat Ohio State, right?
Actually, to answer your question, Joseph, I don't think they were. I think what vaulted Oregon up there was they beat Ohio State at Ohio State the second week of the season.
I can look at the preseason right here. Let's see. Oregon was 11th.
Yeah.
Oklahoma was 2.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. So I think that one victory.
Get that.
Yeah, that one victory, because everybody thinks Ohio State's the best team in the country, no matter what. So when they lose at home, it's like, oh, wow, this team must be pretty good. But then Oregon turn around and lose to Stanford in overtime. So, it's kind of a crapshoot. But let's look at some more of the games there from last week. I don't think there were any others that really stood out. Cincinnati struggled again to beat Tulsa. Notre Dame struggled in the first half a little bit, but ended up beating Navy 34-6.
I'm sorry. I just can't get over Oklahoma. Oklahoma has to have. They have to be the team with the most beef in this whole thing. They were preseason number 2.
Right.
They have not lost a game, and somehow they find themselves number 8 right now. How does that happen? I'm so confused.
Yeah. Well, they were preseason number 2 in the AP. Now they're number 4 in the AP, right?
Oh, in the AP.
Yeah.
Okay, but
So you have to look at it from that perspective.
Continue though. That's going to forever boggle my mind.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I just you're right though. Why should they drop from 2 to 4?
They haven't done anything wrong.
Right. Right.
Go ahead, though.
Wake Forest, which had been undefeated and had been ranked, I believe they were ranked 8th in the playoff poll, lost to North Carolina 58-55, which we knew Wake Forest was probably kind of a crapshoot there of them being undefeated. Wisconsin seems to be coming on. They beat Rutgers 52-3. That helps Notre Dame's strength of schedule a little bit. Texas A&M, this was an interesting game. Texas A&M beat Auburn 20-3, which really helps Texas A&M's cause. And if you go back now and let's look at the SEC standings real quick, so I can get a picture of that. Where am I? All right. Big 12, SEC. All right, come on. All right. SEC, obviously, Georgia's going to win the East. They're 7-0 in the conference. Kentucky's the next second-place team at 4-3. But the West is interesting. You got Alabama at 5-1. You got Texas A&M at 4-2. You got Auburn at 3-2. You got Ole Miss at 3-2. Now, Alabama's got to play Auburn. All right. So if Auburn beats Alabama, you could end up with 2 teams that are Alabama could be tied with Texas A&M, and Texas A&M defeated Alabama. So I'm not sure of the tiebreaker. I think it's head-to-head. So Alabama better hope that they beat Auburn, because if that one game could be the difference for Alabama to be in the playoff or to be completely out of everything, the SEC championship game and the playoff. Thoughts?
I agree. I agree.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I also think, though, I've said this before, though, if Alabama goes to this, if they get to the SEC championship game with their one loss and they lose, I'm not so sure they still don't make the playoff.
Well, but see, I don't see how you could justify.
They shouldn't.
Yeah, how could you justify that? I mean, let's look at the playoff right now, and let's forget about what we said about Oregon for just a minute.
How can you justify? How can you just? Who knows what the committee's going to do?
No, I know that. But what I'm saying is, let's say, I understand what you're saying, but let's say when all the dust settles, okay, you have Georgia at undefeated, you have Alabama with 2 losses, you have Oregon with 1, Ohio State with 1, Cincinnati with none, Michigan with 2, they're out. Michigan State with 2, they're out because Ohio State just has 1. And then you've got Oklahoma, no losses, and you got Notre Dame, 1 loss.
I'll tell you how they do that. They already showed they don't care about Oklahoma, all right, because they draw Mississippi State ahead of them still.
Right.
So if it plays out like you just said, then the teams are in this order: Georgia, Oregon, Ohio State, Alabama. They'll tell Cincinnati, listen, sorry, but you're just not Alabama. You can't hang. I don't care that you're
listen, I don't disagree with that at all.
And they'll tell Oklahoma, hey, you were 8th sitting at week 9. Alabama was 2. We dropped them, but we didn't drop them past them or 8. So they're going to move up some Oklahoma, but they're not going to get all the way to the top 4, and that's how you do it.
Yeah.
And especially if Ohio State loses to Michigan, all right, that knocks Ohio State. Then they can put Georgia, Alabama, Oregon in Cincinnati if they want to, or in Oklahoma. They can pick whoever they want. Although I doubt they're going to jump Oklahoma up from 8 past Cincinnati number 5 if both teams keep winning.
Well, here's a scenario that I'm going to throw out to you guys. Joseph, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. You tell me what you think of this. Now, we've got a 4-team playoff. We've had it since 2014. There's been talk about expanding the playoff to 8. Okay. I believe, I may be wrong about this, but I believe that for that to happen, it has to take a vote among athletic directors of the Power 5 conferences and certain schools. Okay. Now, it could be, I know this is my little bit of a conspiracy theorist coming out, but it could be that the committee wants to create this kind of situation like we just talked about, where a team like Alabama gets in with 2 losses and Oklahoma has none and doesn't get in. Whereas now, if that happens, I guarantee you, if Alabama gets in at 2 losses, Oklahoma and Cincinnati do not get in undefeated, you are going to have an uproar. Now, let me finish my point. That uproar could propel college football to the 18 playoff that they want. What do you think?
Joseph, you go first.
Yeah, I think that's right. So, like, why, if they want it, like you said, why would they need that uproar? Why don't they just?
Well, because they have to convince some of these athletic directors whose teams get shafted this year that it's probably better to do that so they have a chance.
But as it sits right now, Cincinnati's athletic directors have no problem with that because they know that gives them the best.
But Oklahoma may not have had in the past.
But why would they? I guess I'm thinking, why would anybody not want more playoff teams? Because they know that's going to give them, no matter who you are, that just probability gives you a better chance to make it, which makes more money for your school.
Well, because, and again, you guys can jump down my throat on this. I'm just going to tell you what I've heard many times before. It's because in college football they say, every game matters, and the more teams we put in a playoff, it makes the regular season not matter, which is ridiculous. But that's the general opinion.
That sounds like an excuse that a fan would have, or maybe an announcer.
I've heard Herb Street say it. I've heard all these guys say it.
An announcer.
Yeah.
But if you're from the school, you money talks, and if you make the playoffs, the school gets more money. Am I right? You make more money.
Yeah.
Okay. And if there's more teams, you're more likely to make the playoffs. I don't care who you are. So at the end of the day, I think the schools want more playoffs.
Okay, but let me throw this scenario out at you. You're right. But if we go to an 18 playoff and every game doesn't matter, how many people do you think they're getting the seats when they play South Florida?
Just as many. People don't go to college games because it's a good matchup today. They go because they either went there, they're an alumni, they're a student, they're just going to get hammered and go in the stands.
You're right.
They live nearby. They just want to see a college football game. It's more like an NFL. If an NFL team is bad, they might not show up.
Right. You're right. Joseph, any thoughts on that particular?
Yeah, like I'm in favor of the 18 playoff. I don't think waters down the season. Now, I think that this is a whole other topic we don't have to get into, but they need to just blow up the whole thing and make. You can have your Power Five or Power Five conferences, and then put 12 teams in each conference. That's 60 teams,
right?
And then you play a 12-game schedule. The other 11 teams in your conference, and then you get to pick one non-conference game that's a patch if you want.
Right.
Okay, and then that way you have a uniform schedule. You're playing the same teams every year, and that's a little more like the NFL, where you kind of, what I mean, the schedule. It's a little more cut and dry, and then you have your playoff from there. But
I agree.
On that topic. Yeah.
Well, we talked about we need to have maybe one of these weeks, like after the season when we're waiting on bowl games.
Right.
We need to have a whole. You should come on too, Josh. We're going to have a whole episode about how to fix the playoff thing.
Yeah.
Because I agree, they need to have something like the NFL where there's no more debating. There's never any debate in the NFL, right? Because it's based on your record.
Never any debate,
right?
No.
So they need to have something where they can just look at records and go, this is that. There's no question. You can predict every week in the NFL where a team's going to move in their division after it happens, because if they won or lost. You don't have to have somebody tell you where they're going to move them. But yeah, we need to have a talk about that, because I think they need to do something similar to like European soccer, have like an A and a B league, and I can get into it some other time. But
no, I know.
We'll each bring our own ideas to that episode.
Yeah,
I agree. That's a good point. Let's before we wrap up, let's look at next week's schedule. Week 11 coming up. I'm going to just mention the games that involve the top 25 teams. Actually, maybe even just the top 10 teams. This Friday night, Cincinnati is at South Florida. Number 9, Notre Dame is at Virginia Saturday night. Number 8, Oklahoma is at Baylor. Baylor's 13th ranked. Michigan is at Penn State. That'll be a test for Michigan. As I said earlier, Penn State could be the fly in the ointment of all this. Alabama hosts New Mexico State. I mean, give me a break on that one. Ohio State hosts Purdue. That could be another interesting game right there. Purdue has shown that they can play with the big boys in this conference. So we'll see what happens with that game. Number 1, Georgia is at Tennessee. I want to talk about that game here in just a second. Michigan State hosts Maryland. Should be an easy win for them. And that pretty much rounds out. Oregon hosts Washington State. I'm not going to get too excited about that. Oklahoma State hosts TCU again. Let's go to the Georgia-Tennessee game. Most people feel, and I do as well, that Georgia's going to blow Tennessee out. But Tennessee's offense is very difficult to defend, okay? It's a very fast-paced offense. They get a lot of plays in. They've given a lot of teams fits. They've scored a lot of points on Ole Miss. They scored quite a few points on Alabama, given who Alabama is. So I do think Georgia's going to win that game, but Georgia's offense is not quite as explosive as some of these other teams. They basically build themselves on their defense. The defense holds the other team down. The offense gets the ball in the end zone eventually. So I just think that's going to be a closer game than most people think. What do you guys feel?
And I was going to ask you if you wanted to mention Tennessee anyway, because they put up 45 points on Kentucky, right? 45-42,
right?
Kentucky was ranked 18th. They were having a good year,
right?
So Tennessee is not a bottom feeder team in the SEC. I think, I could see the game playing out like, I think Georgia wins. I could see it maybe being like, 35-24, 35, maybe even 28,
right.
Something like that. Where Tennessee, it's not like 40-7, right? So I think that. Tennessee is going to show up at least in some form, but what I did want to bring up overall is, like I mentioned, we were talking about this a little bit off air, but the Kentucky game, I think Tennessee obviously has some talent. I think that in the next 2 to 3 years, I think you can see them start to have a season like Kentucky did this year, maybe Mississippi State, where they're 7-1, maybe 6-2, and they're ranked like 14th, 15th. They're competitive, but I don't see them competing for a national championship anytime soon, really, which is, I think, a disconnect there between the fans who think that they should be in the top 3 or 4 every single year.
Right. No, I agree with that assessment 100%. It's not feasible to feel that they can compete for a national championship anytime soon, but I think within 5 years, they should be at least competing for the conference championship and at least be in the top 5 consideration or top 10 consideration. Without any doubt. I will say this, though, about the Georgia game. We're going to find out about Georgia's defense. I mean, we already know they're excellent, but if they hold Tennessee to 7 points or 10 points, I think it's going to be hard to beat Georgia, period.
Yeah. It looks like right now the Georgia's favored by 20, which I see what you mean. That might be tough to say, yeah, they're definitely going to win by 20. I mean,
right.
I'm not sure.
If you're someone who bets on college football, which I think is ridiculous, by the way, I would take Tennessee to cover that spread.
Yes, I would. Yeah, I would agree with that. The only problem with Tennessee right now, Joseph, and I know why Nathan's got a little apprehension. Tennessee's doesn't have enough talent to hang with these top teams for 60 minutes. You know?
Right.
Good.
No, Ole Miss, they were close at the half. Alabama, they were close at the half. But then they end up pulling away these other teams.
Yeah, if you're telling me if I was going to tell you if they'd be within 20 points at halftime, definitely.
Yeah.
Into the third quarter, maybe. But I just feel like the final score, I don't know, it may be 20, it may not. I don't know.
Yeah, I think they just Tennessee just gets worn down because they don't have enough depth.
I think they wear themselves out on offense.
They probably do. Yeah, they probably do. So anyway, let's that pretty much does it for our Week 10 wrap up. Week 11 coming up. We've talked about those games. We talked about the standings. Make sure you hit us up on Twitter at PressBoxPod. We put a lot of questions up there, a lot of polls. We want to hear from you. Who is your favorite team? Who do you think the best team? I put a poll out. Who do you think the two best teams in the country are? Alabama and Georgia seem to get most of the votes, and overwhelmingly, Cincinnati's percentage of they deserve to be in the playoff was a yes. So let us know again. What do you think? At PressBoxPod on Twitter, at PressBoxPod on Instagram, and of course the PressBox Podcast channel on YouTube as well. We've certainly enjoyed having Joseph with us this week. Join us again next time when we hit you with college football Week 11. For Joseph, for Nathan, I'm Ralph. Thanks for listening of the PressBox Podcast.